All right, this will be a somewhat technical deep dive into the SCOBot runtimes. I get asked similar questions, and this will be an attempt to kind of draw into the things you can do from a UI perspective. There is a broad range of folks coming from I don't do UI to I do UI to I don't even do the internet and everything under the sun. So just have some patience there, and then hopefully you can draw some parallels with things I'm doing here with things you want to do. And if there's something missing, absolutely send me a message and we'll discuss. The implementation, I'm going to scroll up here. So the JavaScript runtimes are JavaScript. All SCORM is JavaScript. If it's not, then it's not done correctly. I will go on the record as saying that, mainly because these APIs are provided to the content running, and it's a JavaScript to JavaScript communication. Now, what you do outside of that, typically when you handle the data, that's going to require you to post the message to a backend. This is all in JSON, by the way, so the student attempt will commonly look like this. So you're going to have data points within the CMI or Computer Managed Instruction object. Here I'm leaving you commented out things of what you could expect to find in certain objects here where they're not populated yet. It doesn't use arrays of objects, it uses counts and then objects within. So I was able to get the entire thing to work within JSON instead of all these weird global parameters that many have probably seen if they're trying to go find a similar free and or paid library. So just be aware this is what this data looks like. Now there are more advanced features of SCORM. We're not going to dig into that. Obviously, if you're choosing to do certain things like that, I would increase complexity and difficulty. If you're choosing to just mainly do the traditional I was here approach to SCORM, which was the student launches, gets scored, and exits, that's fairly easy to do. But when we get into deeper, richer things where we have a piece of content with multiple, we're going to need to support rendering those. We're going to need to support possibly doing score roll-up. We're going to need to figure out how we want the UI to look in that situation. So you could be coming at this from a catalog, just some type of tree view, list, cards. Again, there's a lot of ways to dissect this. I'm just choosing to kind of take one approach here where you can kind of see this launching. Now, the logs that you'll see going on in the back here are going to be prefixed to the runtime that's being used. There's going to be some platform, some content-based logging. Let's go down here to the bottom. So, generally you can watch to see what's going on. I can see here we have app min through an error here. This looks like some kind of bind event. I don't think this is at the platform level. This most likely is within this content. So yeah, it's a little rough to dissect what's causing certain errors, but generally I would say this is a low level one. Now let's come back for a second. So we were here. I'm going to go back one more. And what I would call out is you're going to have settings at the learner preference level that you could choose to support. Video, audio, language, and closed captioning. So that's one option. You're going to have other capabilities of launching cross-domain content. So let's take a look at the package here. So you're going to have a situation where you have a cross-domain project. This is where you would place the cross-domain communication layer on the domain with the content, and then your platform is going to be on a separate domain. And the reason that exists is because we can get a same origin error as that JavaScript to JavaScript communication occurs. So that's how we handle that. So this is handling the runtime, setting the data, launching the content, and then firing events back to your platform that you can then take action on. This implementation is actually a little easier, surprisingly, at the platform level instead of the one that I'm showing you over here, where here I have to bring in the runtimes and I have to do all the code around that, whereas the cross-domain implementation doesn't have those runtimes that I just mentioned, and instead is going to just establish the session and communicate with the iframe post message commands to this project to trigger the things that we want. So there's a sample Angular 9 project here. This is the default lesson viewer. It's not this Angular.scobot.net. This was built off of this. I basically added Amplify, and then over 30 days made this use all the puzzle pieces that I provide you. You could choose to take from some of this, but all of the source code, TypeScript and otherwise, is available. Same with the jQuery side. There's jQuery examples. This is the older but still supported example. I just still have some folks using jQuery. I have some folks beginning to use other frameworks, and this was my approach to supporting both. There are sample services here. So again, there's some docs. There's the Node.js. So I have a concept of you with a Node project exploding a zip file or decompressing it. I have you parsing the IMS manifest file. So this actually gives you the final sample output in JSON format of the parsed XML. This is so you can enter that into your SQL or NoSQL database, even a file system if you like. I actually keep it in a file as well, and that's just for posterity. And then there's schemas, there's XML validation. If you don't know what that is, that's okay. That's just the act of being able to actually validate that the document's real. Commonly after an authoring process, that's not the most helpful. If there was a problem in that process, those people are long gone, and it's a little bit difficult to try to get that rectified. So I took an approach of let's just focus on getting wins here, not like focusing so much on the losses. It does, and it is unfortunate when there's a loss because we have to generally code around that. And defensive programming aside, I generally like to try to make sure you're just aware of what's in these schemas. They're always providing you XSDs. SCORM 2004 was drastic compared to 1.2. They did make things a bit more strict, and they added a few more features. But just remember, this was a consortium. There was a lot of people in the room, and it was designed by committee. So there's good, there's bad, there's confusing, and it's just generally good to use that as a leap forward to understand why you might run into something strange. I go into documentation. Now, I compress the 200 to 400 page of white paper off these standards down to a 16-page document. This document was written in 2015, and it was generally based off of the jQuery one. But again, if you're doing Angular, you're going to be able to kind of consume what was going on there. I do go in a little bit of this history, and I tried to keep it pointed at directly what you need to know, just to survive. And yeah, you'll encounter strange things. You'll have questions, and I'm here to answer as much as I can. There's sample sequence timelines. So here we could actually step through a flow that would typically occur and how SCORM interacted with that. There's things SCORM will provide, and there's things SCORM will basically tell you it's up to you. That's okay. Just be aware of that. There's more advanced features of SCORM. Again, this video is not going to dive into that because that's a super huge subject. But if we do get into multi-SCO, packages with sequence and nav breakdowns and such, I would take the dial and crank it up to complex and difficult, because it's going to put pressure on your front end more than the APIs. The APIs are going to support all of these communication requests. The problem is now we have visual UI handling that needs to occur, like unloading things, loading new things, rolling up scores, calculating stuff. So yeah, it just adds a little bit more to that. And I go into a little bit of this whole, when you get into a car with about 5 billion buttons in it, or like something like an airplane, it's overwhelming. And you're seeing that kind of here. I generally took an approach of, these are admin people. I wanted to kind of expose you to how this was made and what you're seeing, whereas a student probably doesn't need to see all of this. So absolutely take and glean the things that you like and ignore the things you don't. The general concept of, is this in progress? Why is it incomplete already? That might be upsetting to somebody. Or why was I passed but I'm incomplete? Or why am I incomplete but passed? There's going to be more questions around that. And this is, again, academic stuff that folks came up with. We can, again, roll that into something that we want to see. Like maybe we just want finished, and we don't ever want to show failure. That's perfectly an option as well. So yeah, just be aware of that. So Generally in TypeScript, yeah, bringing in the files, I'm going to go through the process of establishing the session. So I'm going to go fetch the student attempt, and I'm going to begin to put it together with the asset type and all of the structure that came along with it. It's like a hierarchical menu potentially. They had terms of organization, and then item, and then items point to resources. So you could be reusing resources and have it multiple tiers. Just be aware that that was a facility that was available to people. I have to iterate over some of those items often, and then I keep track of which runtime, to use. And then we're creating the API, grabbing the student attempt, and then we're setting the runtime data. So I tried to write the code in a way that gives you this 1, 2, 3 approach, even though I know there's a lot of surrounding boilerplate code. Just be aware there's, again, defensive programming is occurring. We might have NaN situations where it's not a number due to a divide by zero situation or some other thing that the content does that we didn't expect. So even if we had perfect unicorn butterflies, and rainbows. Did I say unicorns? Yeah, unicorns are important. So yeah, if we get that, great. If not, then yeah, just be ready for some of that. And this, again, this is the best foot forward here to help you kind of understand. Now you could rewrite stuff. I understand some people don't want to write, event systems into an array and then write a for loop to actually create all of them. You could totally do that, and I'm not going to get nitpicky about you seeing somebody do that. I just want to generally let you know I'm trying to make this somewhat legible so you can kind of see each piece. I do maintain these APIs, so you're going to have the new API potentially coming in, needing to delete the old API because you don't want to expose both old one and a new one. What is this API 1484.11? Well, that was SCORM 2004, and then API, of all things, was SCORM 1.2. I've actually been, and I even worked with platforms that already had that namespace in use, and that's tough. So now, might really do some recoding, but because, yeah, SCORM's going to be trying to look for that namespace. So we're going to add the runtime listener. So the SCOBot JavaScript that I provide is a obfuscated minified version at the base package. And then if you need full access to the source code, that's negotiable. And that would be the second flavor. So I would expose you to the private repos that I have, where you're going to have a branch set up for both the jQuery one and the framework independent one. And then you'll be able to see all updates, even communicate with me there if you need to raise an issue. As in regards to this, so again, we're going to initialize and throw an event. We're going to no initialize. This is a timer-based event, so if these content objects don't actually connect and initialize, I'm throwing a warning, and you can set that as a parameter. You could increase the timeout if you'd like. I think it defaults to 10 seconds. So if you've got a really long-running SCO it takes a long time to load, then that might trigger it falsely. Or if you're in a cell situation where the phone and or device on using satellite just didn't get it in time, it will throw that. So just be careful. And that's an on-off feature. Commit, that's the cue to save this content. I have had some customers ask, can I save the content before the content tells me to? And the answer is generally yes. There's no rules there. Just be aware that you might be spamming your backend with data. You can also do a diff, like I do here, just on the purpose of kind of showing you what's changed. You could actually keep track of just the data points that have changed and only submit those and then merge them on the backend service. That'll lean out the amount of data transfer is going on. It's an option. It's an efficiency. And then, of course, the SCOBot runtime is actually tracking whether something is changed or not. But be aware, because of the session time and such, every time something like that triggers, a change has occurred. It's just minor. And then we get our terminated and our other, I have an error event that fires. That's if I encounter a SCORM error, and I generally keep track of that inside of an array. And that's just handy if you need to come back and see what kind of errors are getting thrown on this content. Are they non-error errors, meaning data not available, or something where the data's never been set? So there's a lot of that. I will call out, and come back to this, there's a breakout right here This goes into the differences between both standards. This is just, again, for posterity. You can understand the spaces that either didn't exist or now were added to 2004 versus 1.2. It's just handy. All right, so then anytime we remove an API, we also need to remove the listeners. You don't want these lingering. It'll cause you a lot of grief. All right, and then getting the student attempt, managing that, I'm kind of showing all that off. There's general things you have to support, like changing the entry to resume if it was suspended. You might change the mode for some reason if they're browsing. And then, of course, I'm keeping track of it. Is satisfied, is progress, is completion based on these. These are just rolled up things based on data already therein. I am not a huge fan of like passing and refabricating stuff constantly and then passing those around. So I'm trying to live off of the main data point and just boil up some things that we get visually based on that. That could be turning something orange, green, or red. There's a lot of different things you can do with that. There's some fall through here, so these are all of the handlers for how it's exited. So you could have an unknown, normal, blank, timeout, or timeout. I did both because I've seen both. Suspend and then log out or log out, and then did both because I've seen both. So yeah, this just generally helps us filter the things that are good, and if we have something we didn't expect, we're just throwing that out. And that might be a point where you have to do, I mean, I'm already doing that, but you might encounter something I've never seen before. So, and then the update UI status, like I said, we're changing something here related to these statuses. You're going to have some UI, you're going to have some backend related stuff. Merging two objects together with these spread operators is one way to kind of extend things. So I'm bringing in the student data settings with the learner preferences, and then you're going to get the same thing out of the resource tier. So like I said, the author could convey information in the package that needs to be placed into the student attempt in order for the shareable content object to function. So when I resume this, if there was an objective in here that this expected to read and then do something with, and it's not existing, this content's broken. I've also seen that. So you can shortcut SCORM by all means, but you're going to start taking the school of hard knocks when you find out there's a lot of this little stuff that is codependent. And it can start to feel fragile because you'll think, well, I just wrote the standard. Why is this other part failing? Well, guess what? The packaging system worked off of an authoring system, and the attempt for SCORM was to move all of this to the LMS platform. So you have this concept of a CLMS, which was a content management LMS all rolled into one. So there was a lot of stuff going on. But yeah, the commits where most of the fun happens, because this is where I'm going to be able to, I'm doing a lot of debugging stuff here too, by all means. Don't feel like you're going to need to do a lot of this, because I have this whole diff where I check to see like what was the old one, what's the new one, and then generally going through and building a payload so I can say this is the high level asset, and then there's an attempt payload that gets passed through, and you're either creating it for the first time or you're updating an existing one against the backend. So with this, I chose to use, I'm going to go ahead and hit done on this so you can see this thing finally terminate. Now you're going to have a try again or review. So you might be limiting attempts. You might not need to expose them all of this stuff. You might have a different way of displaying settings to them and whether you want to do cross-domain or not, or if you need to. So the full one that I've displayed here that we were going through does not cross-domain. This is the cross-domain implementation. Looks similar. There's actually some shared functionality between these two, so I actually have some code cleanup to do, but because of demo purposes, I generally try to show you this is what it looks like when you need to support cross-domain. But what I need to do on my own is bring over all these shared methods and put them into a service for that. And that service would be something then you could use in your platform, because they would already be using stuff that I'm designing here that's generally approved and is functioning. So that's an IOU on that. But yeah, I hope this generally helps. I'm sure you probably still have some questions. I'm going to lastly just touch on the services here. So within Node, what I did is I have an unzip project. And when you drag and drop content, it's actually sitting in a Lambda in AWS, and it's decompressing this. And I have my own needs there. I had to work with an S3 bucket, and I had to do different stuff, and I actually copy it to a whole nother S3 bucket that's on a different domain, so I could do the cross-domain demo. So I'm doing more stuff than typically you would even need to worry about. But that sample code is here. The second bit is the parser. So as it decompresses that, in my situation, because this is all serverless, I'm firing an S3 trigger that kicks off a Lambda to actually do the unzip, then do the parse, and the parser is going to basically scan that XML file and push it into a JSON object, and then write that to DynamoDB. And when DynamoDB gets updated, there's a WebSocket that you get out of the box with Amplify on AWS that updates this UI. So if everything goes right, you push a zip file here, it has all that whole stuff happen, and then you get a card with the asset that you can then launch. That's how that works. But again, I have more samples than are typically provided in the package, but if you end up running into that, I can always share that code. There's some PHP examples I understand. I've got Ruby questions sometimes, Python. I got PHP and Node, but please understand I can't possibly support every single backend language, just in version in between. So these are things you can either run in Docker if you want to shortcut it, or you could transpose to or translate to your language as an option. Okay, I think we'll wrap that up. How did we do? 21 minutes, not bad. All right, so if you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I will talk to you later.